The average house price in 1985, 65,000, right? So about 3 times the annual income. In 2023, the average house price is around 900,000. So about 13 times the average income.
Jeez Louise, that is a big jump.
Yeah, that is phenomenal, right? And again, it's all about what we call in economics called like purchasing power, or if you're talking across economies, it's purchasing power parity. But effectively, what it is how much of this good does your dollar buy? And effectively, it's 13 times less in 2023. Welcome to Checks and Balances, brought to you by Partners Life. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And today, we're assessing the purchasing power through generations. Now, if you think that sounds boring, every time you hear a boomer go, when I bought my first property, it cost me 3 shekels. Well, now you can tell them what you think.
So today's episode, like Mike mentioned, we've got 2 generations, right? We've got the baby boomers who are saying to the millennials, who are saying to the Gen Zs, just stop going out for breakfast. Stop going out for lunch. It's not that hard to buy a house. Today, we have the data. 1985 versus 2023, incomes, interest rates, average house prices, and a whole range of other stats. So you can go tell your parents to leave you alone.
1980s, interesting time. Shoulder pads were big. Cigarettes were big. Interest rates were big. The wars were just a twinkle on the horizon. They're still 10 years off.
Last time Parramatta Eels won a premiership.
Really?
It's been a long time.
All right.
House prices, not so big, which we'll get into today, Mike. Mike, how often do you like this sentiment of, obviously right now, it's very hard to purchase a house. Maybe there's future generations who will just rent forever. What are your thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, look, I think it's a tricky one, right? I don't want to blame anyone in particular for where the housing market is now and the accessibility of the housing market for different generations. What I do find frustrating in general is when people have not a free ride, but they get a really easy kind of ride into something and then they pull the ladder up after them, right? So if you think about education, a lot of people had a university degree for some time, it was free. And then someone just pulls that ladder up a little bit, right? And then it's like, no, actually, you don't need 20%, 5% deposit anymore. You need 20% deposit now. Just pulls the ladder up a little bit more, right? And it's just a series of small things like that really hurts people from generation to generation to generation, right? And people do it for a reason. Sometimes it's regulation. Sometimes it's just we can't afford it. But it does really hurt.
Yeah, and that's the perception, right? The perception is everything's getting more expensive. The gaps between the classes are growing and growing. But the question, is that reality or not? So what we're going to do is we're going to talk through each of the points from 1985 and 2023. So Mike, let's start with wages. Let's compare the two.
All right, so 1985, the average wage, $19,000 a year. In 2023, the average wage is around $70,000 per year.
Okay, so we're more than 3 times up. Okay, so that's a huge jump, Mike.
It is in isolation, right? But what we're thinking about here is how much has everything else jumped, right?
Okay.
And you can apply that to not just houses, but also the average cost of goods.
Yep. Okay, Mike. Well, let's talk about house prices then. So you've said the average wage is $19,000 in 1985. Average wage in 2023 is $70,000.
Yeah.
About a little bit more than 3 times. Hopefully, it's the same for house prices.
Hopefully. However, James, the average house price in 1985, $65,000, right? So about 3 times the annual income. In 2023, the average house price is around $900,000. So about 13 times the average income.
Jeez Louise, that is a big jump.
Yeah, that is phenomenal, right? And again, it's all about what we call in economics called like purchasing power, or if you're talking across economies, it's purchasing power parity. But effectively, what it is how much of this good does your dollar buy? And effectively, it's 13 times less in 2023.
Now, listen to me, Sonny Mike. Let me tell you something, right? Now, house prices may have jumped a bit over that time. I'll tell you. We might have done that. We might have hurt the environment. But interest rates in my day were so much higher. So tell me about the interest rates, Mike.
I'll tell you about the interest rates, James. So interest rates in 1985 were around 17%. So yes, they are higher. 1 week's mortgage payment, though, is about $172. And,
So tell me about the interest rates, Mike. Why do I sound like I smoke
Australia.
and Australian?
Yeah, a ciggy and a Bundy.
Yeah,
and like a VB singlet.
Tell me about the interest rates, Mike.
Right, James. So I'll tell you about the interest rates. In 1985, the average interest rate for short-term fixed was around 17%. Now, that does sound like a really big number. Let's put that into perspective, though. 1 week's mortgage payment on that smaller loan was about $172. And that's with a 20% deposit on the purchase. And that's on a 30-year term. So about 47% of your yearly income is used on a mortgage. Now, James, let's fast forward to today. Yes, there are lower interest rates, right? You're probably looking at around a 7% interest rate for a short-term fix. 1 week's mortgage payment, $1,105. That is with a 20% deposit on a 30-year term. And that is about 82% of yearly income is used on mortgage. So effectively, you're going from 47% of your income being used to pay the mortgage to 82% of your yearly income being used to pay the mortgage. You cannot get a loan for that house if 82% of your income is used to pay the mortgage.
There's a lot of interesting stats in here, right? Like $172 for the mortgage repayment for a week in 1985 versus $1,105. That is like a tremendous jump, a really big number. Housing has increased 248% since 1999. Income has only increased 113%. Like these stats, Mike, no wonder it's so hard to get onto the freaking property ladder.
Yeah, and it's, what we're talking about here is one income. We're not talking about a couple purchasing together, right? So effectively, in 1985, a single person on a median income could probably go out and purchase a house. In today's market, a single person on the average household income could probably not go out and purchase the average house in New Zealand.
If you're single, you may be a little bit alone, but also you can't buy a house. Tough time to be single.
Thanks, James.
You're right, Mike. So I want to just touch on, because there's quite a lot of stats there. We're talking interest rates, we're talking house prices, we're talking income. The stat that really matters, which you mentioned before, Mike, I just want to bring it back to it. So 47% of the average yearly income was used on a mortgage repayment in 1985. Now it's 82% in 2023. That is the stat that really matters, right? That shows what percentage of the average income is going towards the average mortgage repayment.
Yeah.
And there is no arguing, boomers, there is no arguing at all that it is much harder to own a home today to get onto the property ladder. Even though those interest rates were way higher and your salaries were way lower, the total stats, it's nearly 2 times as hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, a really important point to kind of consider here when they are giving advice, when people are saying, if you just cut your spending a little bit more, save a bit more money, do these sorts of things. And, we do say that, when we're talking to people about how do you get onto the housing market or the property ladder, you just got to save the money. But there are more creative ways you can do it. But if you are giving someone that advice that maybe they should just not buy a coffee in the morning, you just got to remember, there is a real sense of hopelessness out there amongst younger generations about buying a house. And it's great for us when we have these conversations with people and we can say to them, you're actually a lot closer than you actually think you are. But I can see why that attitude is there when you look at the stats and how hard it is.
Before we move on, we talk all the time about planning and growing our wealth, but protecting that wealth is just as important. That's why having the right insurance in place can help when life goes unexpectedly.
And that's why this episode is brought to you by Partners Life, a New Zealand operated award-winning insurance provider with over 300,000 Kiwis insured and 89% of claims paid.
Partners Life understand that having some insurance is better than having no insurance. They have flexible and personalized solutions for any budget or situation.
Check out their website in our show notes below.
Yeah, so a lot harder to buy a house now than 30 odd years ago. Let's go to some other comparisons over time though. Education, Mike. So up until the early 1990s, tertiary education was largely free in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So if we think about that compared to today, people starting with student loans, 12% of your income gets taken away, huge head start.
Yeah, and you're looking probably about $40,000, I'd say, is your average student loan in New Zealand. And if I me do the math on that really quickly. If I carry the 1, deduct the 0.0 and do the square root, it's a lot more expensive to get a university degree. So again, you're starting $40,000 back basically on someone else who, let's say you just went and got a Bachelor of Business, majoring in finance, economics, and you chucked in some botany and horticulture on the side because you're interested in that. You are starting $40,000 backwards on someone in 1985.
Yeah,
Really.
and if I was to apply the average student loan with the average salary divided by 2 square root, I think it's about 10 years it takes on average to pay that off as well, which is a big number. Let's move on to the lifestyle aspects of the 2 generations as well. So to be fair to the baby boomers, right? They didn't go out for dinners very often. But now, especially if you're Michael Vincent, going out for breakfast, lunch, dinner, or even just a coffee, catch up with your friends is far more common.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing in 1985, the food in New Zealand, what? Probably potatoes, steak, some broccoli. You can boil some beans if you want. Slap some gravy on the side. No wonder you didn't go out and pay a bit more for it. But you are right. Lifestyle has changed. The way people kind of interact socially has changed quite a bit. And going out to eat is more of an event than it was previously, right? So that is, I guess, instead of going to someone's house or sitting down, and maybe that plays into it because they don't have a house they can go to, right? They're with their parents or they're flatting, they go out more.
Yeah. The other bit is air travel. So it has come down, relatively speaking, from when baby boomers were young. There's more competition. There's more like online platforms. It's much easier to compare, right?
Yeah, 100%. So I guess the other thing to think about there as well as the travel is a lot of millennials and younger generations aren't partnering and having kids until quite a bit later in life. And again, there's probably a multitude of reasons for that. 1, it's bloody expensive. 2, it's actually a lot cheaper to go traveling and see the world and have quite a bit of fun. And 3, again, it's that sense of I'm so far away from buying a house that actually, if I was to get married and have a kid and, a wedding's bloody expensive, we talked about that before, you're just getting further and further away from that goal. And for a lot of Kiwis, owning a house is that ultimate, the Kiwi dream that people aspire to.
Yeah, and I think if the benefit of pairing up with somebody earlier, right, is you've got 2 incomes, 1 household, maybe having kids at a younger age, which means you're probably forced to make more sensible decisions in a lot of situations, which means you're more likely to grow your wealth, accelerate at a faster rate.
Yeah.
The other thing as a father that I do think about quite a bit is, you rewind into the 1980s and it was, I don't know what the stat is, but very common for there to be 1 income in the household, right? You've got 1 person out earning probably just like a normal salary and the other person at home looking after the kids. But who the hell is doing that these days with north of $1 million mortgages, paying like $1,000 a fortnight for childcare, dealing with all the other things and like hoping you can go on a holiday once a year, right? Yeah. Like that is like probably to me the biggest representation of how much harder it is now compared to the 1980s.
Yeah, 100%. So shout out to all the parents who are both working. So if you're listening to this as, a boomer and you're going, another sob story, right? Like everything's our fault. They're not taking any responsibility. That is not what this podcast is, right? So we've got some pretty key takeaways and, we've done a lot of episodes on how to get on the housing market, ways to save, budgeting, goal setting, all of these sorts of tips and tricks that can really help you. But we've got some key takeaways here that we think can really help.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. We don't want this podcast, and it never will be to the day I die. It's not going to be a sob story. No. It's all going to be about, I think there's some interesting stats in here, but it's about going, okay, this is happening. What am I going to do about it? What plan am I going to put in place to get where I want to get to? So yes, buying a house was a lot easier back in my day. While that's unfortunate for this generation, there's nothing you can do about it. So you've just got to have a plan, right?
Yeah, 100%. So our first key takeaway is obviously have a plan in place, get your budget sorted, and make sure you've written your goals down, right?
Yeah. Second piece is like, yeah, the ever on toast, the boomers will give you a hard time, show some discipline. It's actually irrelevant what you spend your money on and what you don't spend your money on. It's about having the clarity of going, what is important in my life, what is not. If I annualize these costs, am I cool that I'm spending money on these areas? What are the goals that I need to work towards? And making sure I'm constantly saving that amount so I can get where I want to get to.
100%. Tip number 3, give me a call. Talk to a mortgage broker. have a chat to an expert, like see how far away am I? What do I need to save? Can I do it now? Are there things that the government has put in place or that banks have put in place that mean I don't need to save for 50 years to get a 20% deposit? Could I do it earlier? Is it a good time to do that because the market's down? Have a chat to an expert. It can really help you shorten that timeline to getting into the house.
And to all the parents out there, the last thing I'd leave you with, so we're talking 1980s to 2023. We will be comparing. Mike and I are going to be a hell of a lot older. I don't know if Mike's still going to be alive, but 2050 versus 2020 is going to be a story in the future.
Yeah.
And going, geez, wasn't it easy in 2020 versus 2050? Because the world's only going to get more expensive. If you've got kids and you're going, okay, tertiary education is free, housing's going to get more expensive, you need to have a conversation with your spouse and go, realistically, what do we want to be able to do for our kids? What plan do we want to be able to put in place so we can make sure we can give them whatever setup that you want to give them? There's no right or wrong answer to it. I don't think you're obliged to, you're obligated to do it, but you need to have those conversations and start planning earlier if your kids are young.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. So we'll wrap it up there. Really, really interesting episode around comparing these two generations. If you've got another idea like this that we haven't tackled, put it in the comments. Send us an email to let us know what you want us to do next. Now, subscribing to the podcast, giving us a review, and giving us a like. If you are finding this valuable, it is the biggest thing you can do for us because it helps spread this message further, helps people understand their finances, take action, take control of their future. Much love to Partners Life for sponsoring this episode, and we will catch you next time.
Cheers.